anything that would be counterproductive to protecting that environment. If you think that, you're wrong. You're wrong. So we, MicroSeismic Inc., we personally, everybody in this room, and I think everybody in this hall, believes that the environment matters, and what we do protects the environment. What I wanted to share with you today is some of the things, or how some of the things that we do actually has a positive effect on the environment, something you out there can be proud of. And it's not just that it's good for the environment, it's good business as well. Because around the countryside, around the world, management, stockholders, governments are all demanding that corporations recognize their impact on the world and the environment. So it's not just that we're good stewards of the environment, it's that we must be if we're going to be able to stay in business. So MicroSeismic Inc., we began as a passive seismic company. I almost called it green geophysics, glad I didn't. But we began as a passive seismic company saying we're going to go make images of the subsurface without using dynamite, without using vibrators. So then we thought that's a very green and environmentally sensitive way to go. In fact, we ended up doing mostly frac monitoring. Now people would say, whoa, frac monitoring, hydraulic fracture. And I certainly lived in an environment where I had to walk past people with signs that were picketing or complaining about fracking, and I was going through, and I would have to resist stopping and saying, do you know that we monitor these fracs and we control them in an engineering way to make sure that they don't frack up into your groundwater, that they don't come out into the subsurface or above the subsurface, that they won't hurt your wells and they won't hurt your houses. And that was our calling. It was to contribute to making sure that fracking was safe. People didn't recognize that. They still fought against it because they were in principle against fracking no matter how good it was. But we made it safe and environmentally sensitive. Now that our business, we did that for 10, 12, 15 years, that business has kind of declined a bit, and we've had the bandwidth to take that same technology and that same environmentally sensitive attitude into some other endeavors as well that are listed here, but are perhaps better listed through here. So we have our Frac RX, the prescription for a better frac, and by better, I mean a more environmentally sensitive frac. We have karst alert as a business. Now, what the hell is karst alert? Well, you know what a karst is? It's a cavern. Eroded out by groundwater in the subsurface. And if it stayed there, that'd be great. But every now and then that cavern starts to collapse and the groundwater causes it to dissolve and become bigger, and then it daylights. Daylight meaning it hits the surface, and if it happens to hit the surface beneath your house, then it goes down into the ground. If it hits the surface beneath your factory goes down into the ground. If you're driving along the highway and a car still opens up in front of you, you go down into the ground. So we have now applied our technology to detecting those developing sinkholes before they daylight. Environmentally important. And then we have CO2 secure. Everybody talks here about putting CO2 in the ground. Why? Because we're trying to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere. We take it, we deposit it in the ground, and it stays there for the rest of all time. Maybe. And our business has been developed to listen to that carbon, to listen to where we put it, to make sure that the injection doesn't cause any earthquakes, and to make sure that that carbon stays where you put it for all time. Environmentally important. And then finally, microthermal energy. What could be better to provide energy in our world than energy that we harvest from the core of the earth? And we can do that cleanly, in an environmentally sensitive way, but the best way is to create a heat exchanger in the impermeable hot rocks like fracking. Yes, fracking. But in the same way that we help these people over here with their hydraulic fracture to produce oil, we can help them over here to make sure that when they create that heat exchanger, the frac stays in the ground and that nothing comes up to the surface. The end product is entirely important to the environment. Our service in creating that product is entirely supportive of the environment. So let's just run through each one. Monitoring FDIs, fracture-driven interactions. When You frack one well and there's another well nearby, it often has an effect, temporary loss of production, permanent loss of production. Those are the things that the oil company cares about, except down here, loss of well. We actually have cases where well bores get sheared off. And when that happens, that's environmentally degrading. It's an economic loss, but it's also an environmental loss. We can monitor and tell the fracking company that they are creating a frack that is going over towards the adjacent well and that might cause this kind of problem. Environmentally important. Oh, I mentioned karst alert. This doesn't have an automatic pass. Karst alert, looking for these sinkholes. And these sinkholes happen, like I said, your truck, if it daylights beneath you, that truck can fall into the road. And I like the way that truck says, get into this. I don't think they meant it at that time. But it's more than an inconvenience, because if that hole daylights, if it opens up beneath your facility, that can cause a huge environmental disaster. And it happens. It happens, folks, all around. Here's pictures from Japan, from down in Guatemala City, over in China, where caves, sinkholes that have daylighted have created environmental disasters of huge proportion. And we can listen and hear the development of that cavern before it becomes, it daylights to the surface and causes problems for the people and the environment. And we've proved it. We have a client in Florida who has a large facility that experienced the daylighting of a karst. Beneath this facility, it caused a hole about 100 meters wide. 100 feet wide in the top, on the top of their facility, their chip stack. And you might say, well, so what? There's no buildings there. But what was here before that hole opened was a lake full of 300,000 gallons of pH 1.7 water. And when that hole opened, it was like someone had flushed the toilet, and that 300,000 gallons of pH 1.7 water went down 500 feet into the limestone layer, the aquifer that happened to be the water supply for the neighborhood. An environmental disaster that cost them $85 million to fix. So they asked us if we could come and apply our technology to listen, to see if we could hear that cavern growing upwards and stop it, tell them before daylight. And we've done it twice now, where we've heard the incipient growth of the sinkhole. We told them where it was. They drilled into it and filled it full of cement before they had this happen. The environment matters. MicroSeismic Inc. is working to improve the environment. And think about it. What if you were building a nuclear reactor in an environment that's a karst environment? 40% of the onshore land in the world is subject to the development of subsurface caverns and daylighting into sinkholes. 40%. So what if you were building a nuclear power plant, and you can do 3D seismic before you build the plant? But if there are cracks, if there are underground water supplies, they will over time, over the life of that plant, develop a cavern that can then open up and have that nuclear plant be at risk. We contribute to protecting that plant. CCUS, well, there's been a lot of talk here, and there's really two areas in the CCS program where we can contribute to helping the environment. One, when you capture the CCS, you've got to get it to the place where you can stick it in the ground. And then once you stuck it in the ground, you want to make sure that you know it's staying there. You want to make sure you're not causing any earthquakes as a result of the injection. So, all of these things, the microseismic monitoring can contribute to by mitigating the seismic hazard. We know that if they're injecting in the ground and they are lubricating faults that are going to move and create a large earthquake, there will be small precursor events. We can hear and map those precursor events, give them notice that they're running the risk of creating a seismic event that will be felt at the surface. Confirming the cap rock integrity, we want to keep it in the jar We have actually, our very first project that we ever did at MicroSeismic Inc. was for Anadarko out in the Salt Creek field, where we set up a 3D seismic grid, or a grid of geophones. And we heard, in the 2 weeks we monitored, we heard the CO2 coming up to the surface. It was like the hissing of a tire as the gas escaped through the caprock. So we can confirm the caprock integrity and confirm the CO2 is staying in the jar. And then we want to track the injected fluid. So seismically, as the fluid moves across the ground, as that plume grows, it will cause pressure changes that will create microseismic events that we can hear and track. All of this is important to the economics of the project, but is also important to the environment. And then should that CO2 start to come up to the surface, should it get up into the groundwater, should it get up into the soil gas, should it in fact escape up and become an aerosol, we actually have partnered, tacked on to our microseismic services, partnered with a company called Everywhere that is a subsidiary of a Korean entity that creates instrumentation to sense that CO2 in the groundwater or the ground soil gas or the aerosol. So we're buttoning that on to our services to continue to improve, to expand our ability to protect the environment. And then I mentioned the pipeline carrying the CO2 to the hole. Well, over here we have our friends from Terra 15, an Australian company that makes a fiber optic interrogator. So it does monitoring using fiber optic sensing of seismic signals. And we can put that in the ground to hear microseismic, but we can also run it along the top of a pipeline or near a pipeline. And we can hear if the pipeline breaks and CO2 starts to escape from the pipeline. So you can see that we're not just leaving ourselves resting on the laurels of our seismic activities. We are in fact expanding into geochemistry and into monitoring of pipelines, all in aid of the environment. And finally, EGS. EGS is growing around the world. It's hard to get away from the core of the Earth. Pretty hard. And no matter where you are on the Earth, if you drill down deep enough, there are going to be some hot rocks. But sometimes those hot rocks are not very permeable. You have to create the heat exchange. You have to create a way that the fluid can flow through fast enough and bring the heat to the surface without cooling down the rocks. So the deeper you go, the hotter the rocks, the better. And what you do is frack those rocks. Now, there have been 14 projects around the world trying to do this over the last 20, 30 years. None of them have been economic. But an advantage, or let's say an unexpected consequence of the oil and gas business declining over the last few years has been that there are frack engineers who used to work for oil companies who became unemployed. And the EGS business is picking up those guys as learning from the last 20 years of our experience, where we learned how to frack the shales. And they're now applying this technology to EGS. They are changing how the EGS is done using the shale experience, and I predict we will have economic projects from this EGS very soon. But when they frack the rock, just as in the shales, they need to watch where the fracks are going. They need to make sure that they are creating the heat chamber they want. They also need to make sure that none of that fluid that they're injecting is causing earthquakes or is escaping up to the surface. The primary way of doing that is microseismic monitoring. It's good for their industry and it's good for the environment. There can be earthquakes created. An EGS project in Basel, Switzerland back in 2006, I guess it was, they actually created beneath Basel some earthquakes, magnitude 2, 3, that were felt at the surface. It's really not funny, but it's amusing that they actually in Basel, Switzerland arrested the engineer who pulled the lever on this fracking and said he was being irresponsible. They let him out of jail pretty quickly. But it is important that we recognize that these injections, whether it's CO2 or EGS, can create earthquakes under the right circumstance, but it's an understood process. And if we monitor and we watch what they're doing, then we can stop it from happening stop this kind of event from happening. So, how do you stop it? You monitor microseismically, you monitor acoustically with fiber, you monitor with geochemistry. You gather all of that data, you put it up in the cloud, very easy to do these days. You bring it back to your processing center, you analyze it. We have machine learning algorithms, pattern recognition, that take all of this multi-physics data and put it together and say, okay, I'm either good, nothing's going on I need to worry about, or I'm a little bit worried, and so I'm going to do some more intense analysis, stay up at night, or there's something bad going on, we need to shut down the injection, we need to figure out, route the cap rock, we need to reduce the pressure so that the tectonics in the earth, the natural tectonics, will close down the system and prevent any further bad things from happening. So, that's what we're doing. And you know, this is a business. We're a service business. And our clients are people trying to make money. Yes. And everything we do, whether it's in the fracking or the CO2 secure or carbon or microthermal, you can rest assured we understand that we're doing it to help them make money. But we're also doing it to help them, and they understand this, to help them protect the environment, to do what they do as good citizens in this world. And that's my story. Thank you very much. If you have a question, come on up. We won't worry the rest of the world about it. How are you, John?
I'm good.
What are you up to these days?